Angle of attack. So to understand angle of attack, there's a couple of terms we need to understand first. The first one is chord line, and the chord line is a straight line drawn from the leading edge of the wing to the trailing edge of the wing. So let's actually draw that in here so you can actually visualize this. Let's do that. Okay. So that's our chord line. Again, from the leading edge of the wing to the trailing edge of the wing. That's called the chord line. And then the next term is the flight path, and that's the path that the aircraft is traveling through the air, not the direction that the nose is pointed in. It's a very important distinction. It is, again, the path that the aircraft is traveling through the air. In this case, the aircraft is traveling in this direction. So let's actually draw this here. So it's actually is traveling in this direction right here. Okay. And the angular difference right here, that is our angle of attack. So there is another term that you'll want to be aware of, and that is the relative wind. So the relative wind is really simple. It's the same thing as flight path, except that it's opposite. So the relative wind, in this case, it runs parallel. Relative wind is always parallel to the flight path, but it runs opposite. And that makes sense when you think about it. Wind is hitting the aircraft from, this direction over here. That's the relative wind. And our flight path is going this way right here. So it's actually, they work just opposite each other. So again, point here, I'm just going to reiterate this, is that, again, the flight path has nothing to do with the direction that the nose is pointing in. So let me illustrate that here. So let's say this aircraft right here was in a flat spin and it's just going straight down. So that would be, a line basically like that. Our flight path would be this line right here. The aircraft is just dropping out of the sky in a flat spin here. So that would be considered the flight path. And notice here that the nose is still pointed over there, but yet the aircraft is going straight down for that. So again, the flight path is the path the aircraft travels through the air. And the relative wind is just opposite that. So in this case, the relative wind, again, is parallel and opposite. So a relative wind would look like this. This would be our flight path. This is our relative wind. And then again, the chord line is just going to be a straight line drawn from the trailing edge or the leading edge of the wing to the trailing edge. In this case, our angle of attack would be something like this. It'd be very steep. It'd be like, almost 90 degrees in this case. So, so let's try something else here. So right now I've got full throttle. I'm going to unpause the sim here, and we're going to decrease our throttle. So let's do that first. What I want you to look at here is we've got the autopilot on. It's on altitude hold. So the aircraft is going to try to hold its altitude. And notice how the wing just went up there. Let's just pause it a second here. Did you see how that angle of attack here actually increased? So let's take a look at this again. Let's actually draw that out so we can see it. So here's our chord line. Again, the line drawn from the leading edge of the wing to the trailing edge. And our flight path is this right here. Do you see how much more of a difference there is in angle of attack here? That angle there has increased quite a bit. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. First off, we've reduced our throttle, so we're not traveling through the air as fast. The wing is not producing as much lift. So the autopilot, in order to compensate that and keep the aircraft at its altitude, it increases the angle of attack, which increases two things. It increases the lift that is supporting the aircraft. It also increases induced drag, which is a little more advanced. We'll get into that later on. But the important point here is If the aircraft is at flying straight and level, and we want to keep it at that altitude, and we reduce throttle, if we want to stay at that altitude, we have to increase our angle of attack, which again increases the amount of lift, and it basically replaces that lift we lost when we reduce the throttle there. Okay, so let's talk about the 4 terms or 5 terms that we've got there. So the first one is angle of attack. It is defined as the angular difference between the chord line and the flight path. The chord line is defined as a line from the leading edge of the wing to the trailing edge of the wing. There's the leading edge, there's the trailing edge. And then the flight path is the path that the aircraft is traveling through the air. The relative wind, the other item we want to define there, is opposite, parallel, and opposite to the flight path. So it's always parallel to, but runs opposite the flight path. So the aircraft is traveling in this direction. The relative wind is in this direction. It's actually hitting the aircraft on this side here. So, okay, I hope that explains that well enough. If you have questions, you can always reach out to us.